Welcome to an SRBT webinar on elevating your embryology career with Guided Mentorship. Part 1 of this series is Leveling Up from Junior to Full Embryologist. Before we begin, please note, this webinar was developed by the Society of Reproductive Biologists and Technologists as an educational resource and service to its members and other practicing clinicians. While this webinar reflects the views of the panelists, it is not intended to be the only approved standard of practice or to dictate an exclusive course of treatment. Members should always use their best judgment in determining a course of action and be guided by the needs of the individual patient, available resources, and institutional or clinical practice limitations. All attendees will be muted except the presenters. Time at the end of the presentation will be reserved for questions. A recording of this webinar will be archived on the ASRM website in the coming weeks. Please watch your email for notification. I will now turn the presentation over to today's moderator, Shane.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to SRBT's webinar series, Elevate Your Career to the Next Level with Guided Mentorship. This is the first in a three-part series. The second will answer the questions, some of the why questions in embryology, followed by career paths, trends, compensation, and the ART labs. This series will conclude with the first SRBT Journal Club. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have breakout sessions where you will be assigned to a mentor to provide more specific career path guidance. Today's speakers are myself, Brad Millett, and Deb Venier. Before we start, there are a few disclosures to get out of the way. So I am the SRBT past president, SCARB treasurer. I was on the ASRM, or still on the ASRM COVID-19 task force, as well as the SRBT SART and CRB COVID-19 task force, and I'm current a senior embryologist at Ovation Fertility. Next slide. Brad Millett is the current SRBT president and lab supervisor and senior embryologist at Dominion Fertility. Next slide. Deb Venier is the co-founder of World Embryology Skills and Training West. She's also a board member of Pacific Coast Reproductive Society and a consultant for Cooper Genomics and Fertility Tomorrow. Next slide. The content of this webinar will be focused on leveling up from the junior to full embryologist with some suggestions on how to take your career to the next level. The breakout sessions will give you the opportunity to get guidance on your career path, even if you feel it has stalled or is in a rut. So what can you do to advance your career? I think one of the most important things is everybody needs to make sure they read and understand the laboratory SOPs. That's an easy thing to do. You can do it in your downtime, and the more you know, the easier it is to learn the new procedures. Make sure to ask your lab director and seek out reference materials for embryology. Learn about the history and science of the field. Any additional knowledge that you gain will be helpful. You need to find out what your clinic does and offers as far as supporting for continuing education options, such as webinars, conferences, online courses, workshops, etc. And ask questions, but always be mindful of what's going on. There's always a time and place for asking questions. Talk to the embryologist or the lab director about procedures, techniques, equipment, tips and tricks, and practicing clinical embryology. It's always good to understand how a microscope works and all the ins and outs of the different parts. Next slide, please. So now it's time to kind of configure your settings and know what your clinic will allow. Next slide. So you need to, if you're interested in advancing your career from an andrologist, junior embryology position to the senior level, you need to know what you can do, what your clinic allows. Every clinic's a little bit different, what they allow people to work on or not work on. Shadowing is always important. Every embryologist is always willing to have another embryologist just observe, not necessarily, be exchanging content or anything, but just seeing how things are going. And then you slowly, ask questions and things at the appropriate times, and you learn how and why different procedures are done the way that they are. Practicing with the equipment or discard material. It's always something easy to do after an embryologist has finished working with something at the end of the day, just to get used to the equipment and learn about it. It'll make things easier. Being more familiar with the equipment will make your training go all that much easier. And everybody, we're always open to answering, questions and sharing knowledge. It's just, you need to just do it at the appropriate time and always ask when that is. Next slide. So once your knowledge, once you know what the clinic will allow, you need to develop and master your skill set. If you're engaged in your clinic will be engaged in training you. Next slide. So mastering your skill set is, always something that's what everybody always masters to do. And if you try to master your skill set, it always makes it easier to work independently. Once you've mastered a particular technique, it allows you to do it independently and offer additional value to the clinic. If you're knowledgeable in many areas but proficient at none, you won't be able to add the value. You'll be knowledgeable, but it's important to be able to, master a particular skill set. And find out where to start and what skills are most helpful in your clinic. Different clinics have different training programs and different areas where your assets may be more beneficial. So they'll start you in a different portion of training. Becoming proficient in embryology, sperm preps, TESI, MESA, and PESA sperm preps, endocrine lab if you have one that's in your center, or just knowing all the, knowing stuff about the endocrine lab, media prep, paperwork, data entry, chart prep is always something that every embryologist is always happy to have assistance with. And show you're dependable and diligent with the tasks you are assigned. Right, next slide. Now, don't be afraid to explore your world and take on new tasks. Always check with the lab director and supervisor before taking on new tasks. Make sure you are ready, and better to ask questions than to do something incorrect. Next slide. Take initiative. Asked to take on other tasks in the laboratory. SART entry is always a good one. Entering PGT results. Most clinics always have 2 people checking, so it's always nice to get that entered in as soon as possible. Learn more about your EMR capabilities. Are there any potential uses in generating statistics? Things on Excel, stock management devices, and calibration logs. All those things are all things that help take the tasks off of the embryologist's plate. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn the talk over to Brad Millett, and he's going to go over some tips on training.
Great, thanks, Shane. So moving forward with our video game theme here, I'll follow up with some training tips, as Shane mentioned, but you're going to be gaining experience points to level up your career there. So after you explore your world, you're ready to gain those experience points and start leveling up. But kind of before we dive into that specific slide, we need to mention that how important it is to be proactive and motivated while you're in your training process. Next slide. Sometimes you can't just wait for an embryologist or the lab director to take you by the hand and walk you through the skills that you want to learn. You kind of have to be persistent and ask to go into the lab, ask if you can shadow procedures like Shane was talking about, practice with discarded materials, and just, again, don't be afraid to ask questions. The other embryologists do have their own tasks and responsibilities for the day, so they may not prioritize your training as much as you'd like. So a lot of times you'll need to, you'll want to learn and practice at the pace that you want and not what the other folks dictate. Next slide. So below is kind of like a list of the things you can do to practice in the lab. But before we go into it, the first thing you need to make sure with your lab director is that it's okay for the use of discarded materials for practice. Some clinics might not allow it based on the way kind of consent's written up or the practice or policies, but just double check there. And so the next step is to just practice every chance you get. Remember that some days, there might not be retrievals that day or ICSIs that day. So when you have time and the materials that you're looking to work with won't be available. So when there are retrievals, make sure you're around to look through the follicular fluid, practice with the equipment. So like I said, below are the a good number of ways to practice with, so we can kind of go through them right now real quick. So the first is just moving around and handling discarded cumulus after retrieval or trimming cumulus. You can also practice with your stripper tips or flexi pets, picking up and moving embryos or discarded embryos or eggs from dish to dish, drop to drop. Kind of gives you a good awareness of how to use the equipment. Vitrification and warming, you can practice using immature eggs or discarded material as well. You can also practice, if your practice allows it, you can inject immature eggs as well. Practice with using the laser on your scope, hatch discarded embryos. Also using your holding pipette from an ICSI or for a PGT case that was done, practice with the pressure that you need to hold the egg in place or the embryo in place, rolling it around with the other pipette. Also, all little skills that you can do to kind of get comfortable in the lab, because that is the main goal, to get comfortable and confident. And the last one is pretty simple. It's a basic skill. It's just carrying dishes from one place to another. It sounds kind of simple, but dishes with lids, oil overlays, with micro drops, just being comfortable carrying a dish. The first time you do it with embryos, sometimes can feel very nervous, but doing it over and over again, you get pretty confident in it. Next slide. So document your training. So ask your lab director if they have a training log in their files, or create one yourself, and document everything you do. Even the littlest thing, document. It kind of shows the lab director and the other embryologists how diligent you are, and also gives them a record to kind of show how fast you're progressing, and give you kind of another leg to stand on when you ask the lab director for time to schedule, you to get signed off on the procedures. Next slide. And so lastly, it's basically courtesy among your other lab workers. When you're training on your own or sharing equipment, just leave everything as you found it. Restock your supplies, clean up the space that you used. Just kind of like I mentioned, basic common courtesy. It shows that you're a good team member, that you can be counted on. And it can be frustrating when you come into a working space and you have stripper tips still connected to the strippers, or maybe discarded dishes still out. So, and lastly, the goal, like I mentioned before, is just to get comfortable and confident being in the embryology lab, using the tools in the embryology lab. And that's just as important for you as it is the other embryologists working around you. They want to know that they can trust the person working next to them, and that they have confidence in you as well. So next slide. I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Deb, and she'll continue with our talk. Deb.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Shane. You guys did a good job. So I've never played this video game, so I'm not sure what the side quest is, but we're going to take a side quest here. And we'll go next slide, Sarah, please. Thank you. I'm going to talk about types of goals and how you should be actually setting goals for yourself and for your lab and for your team, both personal and professional. So some of the things you need to really sit down, and I would actually put them on paper. These aren't things you just kind of have in the type in your head. I literally write my goals down and share them with my lab mates, my team, and my boss. So whether your boss is a senior embryologist or a lab supervisor or a lab director or the doctor, you want to sit down and talk about your goals with that person. So you want to talk about your training goals and be specific, not just, oh, I want to get trained. That's way too general. You have to have very specific types of goals, and where you want to start with your training, what the timeline is for that training, and specific details as to where your boss thinks is best for you and where you want to be and where you kind of can meet in the middle. You need to have goals for continuing education. Are you going to be going to meetings? Are you going to do webinars? Are you going to local networking gatherings for your embryology society, anything like that is important for you to continue to grow in your career. You should have 5-year goals. These are like long-term goals. So in 5 years, you should be fully trained embryologist. If you're not, there's a serious problem. So a 5-year goal needs to be kind of a bigger picture type of thing. Are you in the location you want to be? Are you going to be able to move up in your career at the lab that you're in? Is this something do you plan on having kids? Do you want to be a supervisor? Do you want to further your education and get your master's? Things like that. And then you also have to look at your clinic and your lab goals as well, and also hope that you're there as a team member to support them. And what are their goals and how can you help them achieve their goals? So it has to kind of go both ways. Yes, you want to get trained, you want to move up the ladder, but what can you do for your lab as well? And what does the team need as a whole for their goals? So if you need to, improve your statistics, you want to bring in an endocrine machine and you're not running endocrine, can you help start that up? Are there things that are going on clinic-wise that you can help them to achieve those goals too? Helps a lot more if you want your team to support you in your personal goals, to also be helping them in their professional goals as well. So again, we're going to go short-term and long-term. Okay, so when I talk about setting goals, I love to compare it to people when they say they want to get fit. Oh, I want to get in shape, versus someone who says, I signed up for a marathon. And it's directly correlates for me to setting goals and achieving your goals. Because when I say I want to get fit, I'll buy my workout clothes and I might go run a couple of times, but I never actually get fit because I don't have specific goals set. But when someone signs up for a marathon, they have a date. The marathon's on April 26th, and you have to be in shape by April 26th, and you have to have a plan along that way as to how you're going to be able to run 26 miles in 4 months. So you're going to have 3 short runs a week. You're going to cross train 2 days a week. You're going to have your long run on Sundays. Now, if you're not a runner, don't worry. You don't have to run to become an awesome embryologist. This is just an analogy that I use. And you're going to increase your distance each week, and you have a defined endpoint. So that's what I expect people to do when they're setting goals. I want you to have a defined endpoint. I want to be a fully trained embryologist in 12 months, in 16 months. It has to be something realistic that your lab director would agree is potential. But then I want you to break it down into specific items. So if you're a junior embryologist and you're doing egg retrievals and vits and thaws, and you want to move into ICSI, let's go next slide, Sarah, please. Okay, there we go. We'll go back to that one, but this is my thought right here. Is if you're going to be trained in ICSI, you need to set very specific goals, not just I'm going to be trained in ICSI. So how you would break that down is you would say, okay, I'm going to observe ICSI 2 days a week with a skilled person giving me tips. And I'm just throwing in random dates here. So March, week 2 of March, I would like to do this. And you're going to sit down with your team and they're going to have to be agreeable, like, okay, make dishes during your lunch hour so that you can watch us do ICSI on Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever days we have ICSIs. Good plan. Then you're going to, a lot of times people are like, oh, there's no eggs for me to practice on. Nothing's there. I leave notes, Post-its. Most embryologists, we love Post-its. They're all over the lab. I leave notes on the incubators for all the other embryologists. Hey, save the GVs today and tomorrow, save the immature eggs. And again, like Brad said, you have to have policies and procedures in place that allow you to use discarded tissue for training. If you don't have that policy and procedure in place, you can write it and it can become a policy and procedure for your laboratory as long as your consents match that. So you want to set up so that you can practice using GVs and immature eggs. You want to practice setting up the pipettes. So you're going to watch someone set them up. And I just always say, monkey see, monkey do. I watched you do it once, now you try it. I watched you do it, now I try it. So once you're able to watch people set up pipettes, you start saying, okay, I'm going to set up everyone's pipettes today. I'm going to set your pipettes up for you. You're not doing ICSI yet, but you're practicing setting up those pipettes, okay? Then you're going to move into practicing immobilizing the sperm. And you can say, I'm going to load my pipette 10 times this week with sperm. And how you do that is simply asking your team, when you're finished with ICSI, please leave your dish and your pipettes on the scope. The sperm's there, the pipettes are there. You can just practice immobilizing sperm and loading them into the catheter, into the pipette. So things like this really can be done at the end of the day. Just leave your ICSI set up. And yes, as someone that's training, you're going to have to stay a little bit late sometimes. You're going to have to put in some extra time. If you want to get trained, you're going to have to put in that extra effort. You can't expect your whole team to be staying late all of the time for you so that you can get trained. Like Shane and Brad both kind of alluded to, you have to take initiative. And when we say initiative, it means you're going to have to stay late by yourself sometimes. So expect that. And this is a good time to do that, is to practice with sperm on the ICSI scope. Then once you've practiced enough, you want to ask if someone can observe you injecting some immature eggs, and they can give you tips while you're injecting. And there, your timeline is going to be right around April. So you started in March, and by April, you want to be practicing your injections. If nobody has time to watch you, take a video. It's just a click of a button on your computer when your laser monitors are up. You can record it all, and your teammates, team members, lab director can watch it at a time when they have time. Practicing, next step would be practicing injecting 2 to 3 mature eggs on cases that have more than 12 mature eggs. And this is just a kind of a guideline. This is whatever you and your lab director want to work out. But typically, if there's more than 12 mature eggs, I would be happy to give 2 of those eggs to my junior embryologist that's training, that I've seen them practice on an immature egg, and I see that they have the skills to do that. And then we start letting them do just a couple at a time. And as they're getting fertilization on real eggs that are mature, then we move into more, and then we're eventually splitting cases with a senior embryologist in the month of May. So if there's a detailed plan like that, week by week by week, and you're making it happen, then you can get there. So that's just kind of an example of ICSI. All right, we can go back one slide, Sarah, the one I skipped. So setting a goal versus achieving a goal. Again, this is something that takes dedication and determination. You have to have the enthusiasm and the drive to do this. You can't just tell the lab, I want to get trained, and then expect that to happen. This is you. It's on you to make it happen. And you can ask your team for help, but you need to be the one driving it. But you have to be careful that you're not too pushy and expecting too much of your lab team. Most labs that I've been in the past couple of years are super busy. They don't have the time or the energy or really the desire to want to train a junior embryologist. They're overworked and they want to go home. And you kind of have to respect that, but they also have to see the value in getting you trained. If they can get you trained where you can be helping out on weekends and they can get more days off, hopefully they see the value. So those of you that are juniors, seniors at a higher level that are listening, it is of value to you to help get your juniors trained, because they're going to be able to support you at a higher level when you have super busy days. And when you have long weekends, you can call in this junior embryologist that can now do ICSI. It's like, oh, thank God they can do ICSI. So having someone that is trained is of value to you. So keep your realistic expectations. And again, that's a discussion that needs to be had with your superior, whether it be a lab director, a lab supervisor, or just another senior embryologist. It's going to take time, and you have to make a plan. And I mean, put it in writing for sure. Okay, next slide, Sarah. And I think we can go 2. Perfect. So some examples of 5-year goals. I kind of touched on this early on, but would be to take either the ALS or the ELS exam and the ABB, which is kind of more of an embryology, a little bit easier exam than the TS exam. So a lot of people are trying to jump in and take the TS these days. TS is super hard. But the ALS and ELS, which is Andrology, the acronym laboratory scientist, an embryology laboratory scientist. I think that's what the acronym is for. It's a little bit more achievable exam if you're a junior embryologist. So that's something you might want to look into. You might want to look into doing some research projects, present an abstract, become a CAP inspector. Any of you can become a CAP inspector. If you log in, you can get an account online, even if you're a junior embryologist. You can become a CAP inspector by taking the online course, and you can go and inspect a lab with your lab director or your senior embryologist who does the lab inspecting. You can go do it. So I think that's cool. I learned so much inspecting labs and doing it like as a junior with a senior person. I think that's a really good way to move up in your career. Your location, where do you want to be? Sometimes people are stuck in a city that they don't want to be in and they feel like they can't move, but you have to set a 5-year goal. I want to be living in San Diego because I think San Diego is kind of great. In 5 years, then that's where you need to make that happen. Start networking, start talking to people in San Diego. You might want to go part-time. If you want to have kids, you want to go part-time, you have to put that down, start talking to your lab director. You might want to become a supervisor. You might want to get your master's degree. And all of those are things that you should really be networking with your teammates, with your supervisor to help make this happen. If you're in a place where they don't want you to do any of that stuff, that's not a good sign. You want to be in a place where your workplace wants to support you in growing, but you also need to support your clinic and your lab in growing. So it's a two-way street. And if you're in a good team, it works both ways. If you're in a place where they don't want to support you in doing any of this stuff, then you would need to find a place where they do support your development. But you also need to think, if they don't want to support you in any of this, is the reason because it's you, or is that just their train of thought in general, regardless for anybody? So if it's a you thing, you might need to start rethinking yourself a little bit. All right, next slide, please, Sarah. Did I mute myself? Next, there we go. Goals to attain. You need to be ready to begin training with actual patients. So that's something that you need to discuss with your team. You want to become a trusted and reliable part of the embryology team. You want to understand that you still need guidance always. I still learn something new. Every time I go and work in a new lab, I never leave the lab without learning something totally new and something kind of awesome that I'm like, how did I never know this little trick? So I'm always open to the fact that there's more to learn and more to be taught. Know your limits and know when you need to ask for help. You don't ever want to, get behind the gun when you're trying to do a VIT and you can't find your embryo and you can't get it loaded and you sit there for 5 minutes while it's in VS. Don't do that. Ask for help. Become confident and decisive in your decision making. You want to be prepared for a procedure. You want to be at the bench top during a procedure and be confident and know what you're doing and not be second guessing yourself. So these are all some other types of goals that should be on your radar. Next slide, please, Sarah. All right, so we have completed our Zelda game, which I've never heard of. Next slide, please, Sarah. And I guess Zelda 2 is the next link. Did we just level up one? Kind of? I don't know. All right, next slide, Sarah. All right, so for continuing education, I just wanted to jot down a few ideas that you should kind of have ticking in your brain. So annual meetings, not each meeting is great for everybody. I think ASRM for a junior embryologist might be a little overwhelming and it might kind of go right over your head, but some of the smaller meetings like AAB or SWES or the Madison meeting are really awesome smaller meetings that are more embryology focused and much more helpful for a junior embryologist looking to move their way up. Webinars right now are easy CEUs. So webinars, there's probably 3 or 4 a week. And if you don't get any emails about them, the senior embryologists in the lab probably do. So you want to ask them to forward those emails to you so that you can start learning from the webinars as well. You can get an ASRM embryology certificate, which is kind of just like an online course that teaches you more about the field of embryology. Networking, I think, is huge, whether it be via social media or LinkedIn or going to meetings, or excuse me, the groups, what is the word I'm looking for? Societies, the embryology societies, sorry about that. And then journal clubs too. So I think on the next slide, Sarah, I have a list of all of the societies that you can join by region. So there's SoCal, NorCal, there's a Colorado, New York, Atlantic Coast, Delaware, New England, Chicago, Dallas. So no matter pretty much wherever you are in the United States, there's an embryology society where you can gather and talk shop. And I have loved the networking that I've done in these groups. And there's juniors, there's seniors, there's andrologists, there's lab directors. We're all there, and we're all kind of like a family. And I love that. And I know a lot of us work in offices where the doctors might be butting heads and not like each other, but embryologists, those of you that have been around, we all love each other, and we all are there to help each other and support each other. And we're not keeping any secrets from each other. We're always here to help. And ultimately, we know we're in this to help our patients. And if we think another lab might have had an experience that could help you, and you call somebody up at another lab and like, hey, I'm having this issue, we're always there to help each other out. And I think that vibe has come from these embryology societies. So I think it's very important that you get involved in your local society to help you grow, to help you network. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so we're going to go to some breakout sessions. So we're going to go back to Shane. And I really quick want to say one quick last thing. This is the first time I've ever seen breakout sessions offered where you're actually being offered a mentor, where there's a senior person, embryologist, that is really just offering their hand to you, saying, how can we help you? How can we help you grow and be happier in your career? And how can we help your job at a clinic become a better, more successful, happier situation? So we're here to support you. And we hope you come to these breakout sessions, and you're going to be split probably 5, 6, 7 people per mentor. And we don't care. It's going to be you're going to be randomly assigned to either Shane, Brad, myself. I think Sangeeta is on here, and Arthur and Liesel. So we're all here to really just kind of support you, bring you up, and see how we can elevate your career. So I think it's awesome as a first time thing that SRBT is offering. So see how it goes.
Well, I think Deb said it very well, exactly what our intention is for what we hope everybody gets out of these breakout sessions. It's just as rewarding for us as mentors as it is to, probably for your mentees getting to have more personal contact with some of us that maybe you've seen or heard of through, through the years. So the goal of this is we're going to establish these groups and continue to meet throughout the next couple of months. There's a couple of more webinar sessions that we're going to have. There's one on March 29th and another one on April 26th, which will conclude this series. And then we're going to end it with a journal club to try to keep everybody in contact and stuff, and to keep learning, because as everybody knows in embryology, learning is key. The field is ever changing, and the more you know, the better embryologist you can be. So these breakout sessions, the mentors will go over a little bit of their personal experience, how they got to where they are, what paths in particular they took, get some information from you. But the most important thing is make sure that everybody exchanges contact information so that everybody can continue to stay in contact and keep working on the mentorship. And now Sarah will break us out and randomly assign everybody to the breakout sessions.